One might argue that, if Varric had not been so certain his cast-off mate would arrive alone, none of the ruin that later found him would ever have come knocking. But then again, if he had done one kind thing on the night he set her aside, Sorrel would never have walked into that hall, with her chin high and nothing left to lose. So really, when a person traced the whole thread back to its start, the undoing of House Var was Varric's own careful work, every knot of it. He simply had the poor grace to blame her for it afterward. The great gathering came to Hollowmere only once, in a long while, when the river houses and the mountain houses and the crown all crowded under a single roof to swear the old peace over again. Sorrel had not expected to be summoned to it. She was a healer of the Grey Order now, her sleeves stained with crushed root, and her hands smelling of tallow and bitter leaf. And healers of the Grey Order were not the sort of guests the great houses fought to seat near the salt. Yet the summons had come all the same, sealed and correct, and she had known the hand behind it before she broke the wax. Varric always did like an audience for his cruelties. 2 winters passed. He had stood her in the birch grove, under a thin moon, and spoken the words that cut a fated bond clean through. She still remembered how he had said them, flat and quick, like a boy reciting a lesson he had been made to learn by heart. She had been too broken that night to wonder who had taught it to him. She wondered now sometimes, in the small cold hours, but it never led anywhere she could bear to follow. Everyone knew what a rejection did to a wolf. The bond scar closed over and never opened again. A cast-off wolf walked the rest of her days, barren of the bond, unpaired, pitied in the soft way people pity the lame and the widowed. No second fate ever came for such a one. That was simply the law of the blood older than any crown, and Sorrel had made her peace with it the way you make peace with a limp. You stopped reaching for what the leg would no longer do. So, she understood the shape of the evening perfectly. Varric meant for the whole realm to watch the discarded healer slink in, unclaimed, robed in grey among the silks. Proof to every house present that House Var had been right to throw her back. He had even chosen her a place. Far down the hall, below the envoys, below the lesser cousins, a single stool sat apart from the benches, so that her aloneness would have room to breathe. She wore the grey, anyway. She had thought about begging a gown from Linnet, and had decided against it. If they wished to stare at the rejected healer, they could stare at what she truly was, and she would give them not 1 inch of shame to feed on. The hall of Hollowmere swallowed her the moment the doors opened. 100 candles and more, banked along the walls in iron trees, and beneath them the whole bright weight of the realm turned to look. She felt the looking land on her skin like a change in the weather. The murmur dipped, the way a stream dips going over stone, and picked back up meaner than before. There she is, the Var woman, cast off, and still she comes. Sorrel kept her eyes forward, and her step even, and started the long walk down toward the lonely little stool. She found Varric without meaning to. He stood near the high table, in the deep blue of his house, broad and golden and pleased, a cup of wine held loose the way a man holds a thing he has never once had to worry about losing. Beside him hovered a slim woman of some river house, all pale throat and borrowed jewels, exactly the sort of match a proud heir chose when he wanted the world to see how far above a herb-stained healer he could reach. Varric watched Sorrel come and let a slow smile spread, and lifted his cup to her a bare thumb width, a private toast to her humiliation. She gave him nothing. That, at least, she had grown very good at. She was perhaps halfway down the hall when the room changed. She felt it before she understood it, the way her wolf had always felt weather. A pull in the air, a tightening, every hair along her arms lifting at once. The murmur did not dip this time. It stopped. It stopped as though a hand had closed over the whole room's throat, and into that sudden ringing silence came the sound of a single set of footsteps, crossing stone, unhurried, certain, coming toward her. Sorrel turned. The Alpha King was already halfway to her. She had seen Ansel only from a distance before, a figure on a far dais, a face on the poor coins the order was paid in. Nothing had prepared her for the nearness of him. He was not the largest man in the hall, but the hall had arranged itself around him without being told to, the way iron filings arrange around a lodestone. Dark hair, a plain dark coat with none of the peacock about it, and eyes the gray of river ice that found her and did not once look away. Her wolf, which had lain quiet and scarred and sullen for 2 winters, came up under her skin all at once and stood, ears forward, alert to something she had no name for. He stopped an arm's length from her. Every soul in Hollowmere had gone still enough to hear a candle gutter. Then Ansel, king of all the marches, reached out and took the hand of the cast-off healer in gray and folded it into the crook of his arm as gently as if she were made of glass, and turned with her to face the frozen room. Sorrel forgot, for a moment, how breathing was done. Down the hall she saw Varric smile, die a slow, public death, the wine cup halting halfway to his mouth. She saw the pale river woman's face curdle. She saw 100 great faces run through shock and hunger and something close to fear, all in the same held breath. And she felt absurd and unbidden, the warmth of a king's arm under her scarred hand, and had not the first idea in the world why it was there. Sorrel did not sleep. One does not sleep after the sky has changed color. She lay in her narrow cot in the Order's East dormitory and stared at the beams and turned the evening over and over, looking for the seam in it, the place where the trick showed. There had to be a trick. Kings did not cross crowded halls to claim rejected healers out of tenderness. Kings did nothing out of tenderness. She had heard him say only a handful of words before the stewards had swept in, and the gathering had broken apart into 100 whispering knots. He had said, loud enough for the near benches, that the lady was under the crown's protection now, and would be seated at his own hand. Then he had looked at her once more with those river ice eyes, said quieter, "We will speak soon," and let her be led away in a daze, under the crown's protection, as though she were a bridge, or a mine, or some other thing a king kept safe because it was useful to him, but useful for what? She had turned that question 100 ways by the time the gray light came, and it had not given up a single answer. Linnet found her before the morning bell. Of course, Linnet found out everything before everyone. "Is it true?" she demanded, dropping onto the end of the cot without being asked, her round face fierce with worry. "Pran says half the kitchen swears the king held your hand the whole length of the hall." "Bram exaggerates. He said it was only a moment." "So it is true." Sorrel pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes. "It is true," she said. "And before you ask, no, I do not know why. I do not know anything. I went to be shamed, and instead I was taken up by the king in front of the entire realm, and I understand it exactly as little as you do." Linnet was quiet a moment, which for Linnet was a great labor. Then she said, "Lo, they are saying worse things than shame this morning." Sorrel took her hands from her eyes. Bram came in on the word, gangly and gray-faced, a boy who healed better than he lied. He shut the door behind him with the particular care of someone carrying bad news. "They are saying you tricked him," he said. "That a discarded wolf, who cannot bond, crept close to the king and worked some herbcraft on him, some gray order poison of the mind, to make him claim you. House Var is saying it loudest of all." Of course it was. Sorrel almost laughed. Varric could not bear to be made small in that hall, so he would make her a witch to explain it. It was cleaner than admitting a king had wanted the thing Varric had thrown away. "Let them say it," she said, though her stomach had gone cold. "I did nothing. The truth is on my side." "The truth," said Bram unhappily, "has never once won an argument against a great house with a grievance." Sorrel knew he was right, and knowing it, sat in her belly like swallowed stone. An accusation of herbcraft was not idle talk. A house with standing could demand she answer before the crown's own justices. and if enough of them murmured the word witch in the same week, the order might be forced to cast her out to keep the taint from spreading. She had spent 2 winters making herself small and beyond reproach, so that no one would ever again look at her the way the whole realm had last night. And a king had undone all of it with a single kindness. She washed her face in the cold basin and did not let the other 2 see her hands shake. The door opened a 3rd time without a knock, and all 3 of them came to their feet, because the man in it was not the sort you sat before. Oswin filled the low doorway, the way he filled most rooms. Broad and silver at the temples, his healer's grays finer than theirs, but grays all the same. He had been master of the order for longer than Sorrel had been alive, and when House Var had cast her back like a bad fish, it had been Oswin who had come to the birch grove himself and gathered her up out of the cold and given her a place and a purpose and a reason to keep her feet under her. She owed him everything she now was. She had never once had cause to doubt it. "Leave us," he said kindly to the other 2, and they went. He looked at her a long moment with his warm, tired eyes. "Well," he said, "you have had a night." "I did not do it, master," she said. "Whatever they are saying, I never touched him. I never worked anything. I only walked, and he—" She stopped. "He crossed and he took my hand, and I do not know why." "I know you did nothing," Oswin said gently, and the knot in her chest loosened a little. "I have known you since you were a shivering slip in a grove. You could no more bewitch a king than fly." He sighed and lowered himself onto the stool by her cot as though his knees pained him. "Which is precisely what troubles me, child. Because a king does not do what he did without a reason, and I have lived long enough to know that when the powerful reach down into the low, for a reason of their own, it is rarely the low they mean to keep safe." His words settled the very fear she had not been able to name all night. "A hand under yours could lift you up, or could just as easily hold you still while the knife came. I have spoken for you already," Oswin went on. "To 2 of the justices who owe the order their discretion. They will not let House Var rush you before a court, but my voice reaches only so far, and Varrick's house is old and loud." He reached out and pressed her cold hand between his warm, dry ones, the way he had that first night in the grove. "Whatever the king wants of you, be careful how you give it. Promise me that much." "I promise," she said, and meant it, grateful past speaking for the one man who had never once asked her for anything but her care. "There is more," he said, and drew from his sleeve a folded paper, heavy, with the crown's own wax. "This came at dawn. For you." Her hands did not want to take it. She made them. "The king summons you this evening," Oswin said, watching her face. "Privately? And Sorrel?" "The summons carries a condition. It says you are to come to him and give your answer." He paused. "It does not say to what." They came for her at dusk, 2 of the crown's own guard, and walked her up out of the low-order rooms into a part of Hollowmere she had never once seen. Sorrel had spent 2 winters learning every drafty corner of the healer's wing, the cold stores and the drying lofts, and the little walled herb yard where nothing thrived. She had not known the hold could look like this. Warm stone, deep rugs, the color of old wine, corridors hung with the banners of houses long folded into the crown. The guard left her at a door of dark carved oak, and one of them knocked, and a voice she already knew too well said, "Let her in." The room beyond was smaller than she had braced for. A fire, 2 chairs, a table laid with a plain supper that no king should have been caught eating, and Ansel, coat off, sleeves turned back, looking less like a lodestone, and more like a tired man, which was somehow worse for her composure than the crowded hall had been. "You came," he said, and something in him eased. And there it was again, the thing that had frightened her in the hall, and that she had spent all day telling herself she had imagined her wolf lifting. A warmth, turning over low in her chest, in the exact place where the bond scar had sealed itself shut, 2 winters ago, and had lain dead and quiet ever since. It should not have been able to stir. That was the whole of the law. A cast-off wolf, felt nothing there ever again. And yet in this warm, small room, near this tired man with the river ice eyes, the dead place in her had begun, very faintly, to ache. She clamped down on it hard and kept her face still. Whatever this was, she would not let him see it move her. Was there a choice? She said. The summons read, as though there was not. There is always a choice, he said. I only make certain mine are ones people can survive taking. Sit. Eat. You look like a woman who has not eaten since I ruined her evening. She did not sit. Why did you do it? She said. That was the only question in her, and it came out plain, in front of the whole realm. You reached down and took the hand of a cast-off healer, and now half the marches are saying I bewitched you, and the other half are only waiting to see how fast you tire of the joke. You have made my life a great deal more dangerous than it was, and I would like to know for what. Ansel was quiet. Then he said, because I could not stand there and watch them do it to you. She stared. He rose and came around the table, not close, careful of the space between them, the way you are careful near a hurt animal. I know what that hall was meant to be, he said. Varric arranged the whole of it. The stools set apart, the seating, the timing. He wanted the realm to watch him grind a woman to nothing, for the crime of once being wanted by him, and then not. He said it more simply than that. He called it settling a matter of his house. He came to me a week past and asked the Crown's leave to put you finally beyond the Order's protection. He smiled, the way men like him smile when they are certain of a thing. And I found, he said, that I would rather cut off my own hand than give it to him. It was a good answer. That was the trouble with it. It was warm and plain, and it wanted very much to be believed, and Sorrel had learned in a birch grove exactly what it cost to believe warm, plain things, spoken by handsome men. You do not even know me, she said. No, he agreed, not yet. But I know Varric, and I know what he is, and I know that a woman he wants that badly to bury is almost certainly a woman worth digging up. He tilted his head. Tell me I am wrong. She could not, and hated that she could not. There is a condition, she said instead. The summons. My answer. His face changed. The ease went out of it and something more guarded came in, and for the first time she saw that the tired man had teeth. The claiming buys you nothing if it is only a night swim, he said. Varric will simply wait me out. So I would make it real, in the eyes of the law and the houses, a betrothal of the crown. Under that shield, no house alive can touch you, and Varric's poison dies in his mouth. He watched her. That is the condition. That is your answer to give. Yes, and you are the crown's own and untouchable. No, and I cannot protect you past a fortnight. The fire snapped. Somewhere far below a bell counted the hour. And what, she said slowly, does the king get for spending his own name to shield a herb-stained nobody he met yesterday? Because I have lived among the great long enough now, your grace, to know none of you spend for nothing. For a moment he did not answer, and in that moment she saw it, the thing under the offer, quick and buried, and gone almost before she caught it. His gaze cut, just once, to a door in the far wall. Beyond it, she heard the low murmur of other voices, careful voices, the particular hush of men guarding something, and under the wood smoke and the plain supper, her healer's nose caught something else. A thread of bitterness in the air, faint and green and wrong, the ghost of a smell she knew from her own dark shelf of things that were kept locked. She had spent 2 winters learning which leaves eased a heart and which ones stopped it. She knew the scent of a poison, the way a smith knows the color of hot iron. It was here, in the king's own private room, worn into the air like a stain that would not wash out. And now that she looked at him with a healer's eye instead of a frightened woman's, she saw the rest. The gray cast under his skin, the careful way he held his left side, the look around the eyes of a man who had been very ill quite recently and had told no one. You are sharper than he said You would be? Ansel murmured. Then who said? She asked. But he only smiled, and it did not reach his eyes. And she understood, with a healer's cold certainty, that the king was not afraid of Varric at all. He was afraid of something else entirely, something behind that door, and the shield he was offering her had another edge she could not yet see. A wiser woman, one might observe, would have taken a single look at the poison worn into a king's own walls and run for the far hills that night. But Sorrel had nowhere in the world to run to, and worse, she had never once been able to leave a sickness alone after she had smelled it. So she did the unwise thing. She stayed, and gave him his answer, and it was yes. Not for your reasons, she told him, though I will take your shield, because I am not fool enough to stand in the snow when a roof is offered. But I want a thing in return, and I want it plainly. Name it, Ansel said. She looked at the door in the far wall, then back at him. You have been poisoned, she said. Recently and more than once, unless my nose has forgotten its whole trade. I can smell it on the air of this room, and I can see it in the gray of your skin, and the way you favor your left side as though something under the ribs has not finished healing. I am a healer before I am anything else, Your Grace. If I am to put my name beside yours, I want the truth of what is trying to kill you. For a long moment he said nothing, and she watched him weigh whether to lie. She had grown very good at reading that particular pause. Then he said, an old trouble, a bad season, nothing that need concern my betrothed. And that was a lie, cleanly told, and they both knew that she knew it, and he did not insult her by pretending otherwise. It was almost worse than the truth would have been. She let it lie for now, but she took it and she filed it. The way she filed a fever that had broken too easily and would surely climb again by morning. You want to know what you are worth shielding, she said instead, because the anger was easier than the fear. Then you ought to know what your realm looks like from where I stand. You sit here at your plain little supper and think yourself a humble sort of king. 2 floors beneath us, there are children coughing themselves inside out for want of a fever draught. The order requisitioned 3 seasons past and never received. The crown sends its orders down. Fill the stores, tend the low houses, keep the sick from becoming the dead, and the stores stay empty, and the orders die somewhere between your warm halls and my cold ones, and not a soul up here has ever come down to ask why. She heard the shape of the words even as they left her, and some far quiet part of her noted that they were not entirely her own, that she had heard them first in Oswin's tired voice, across 100 long evenings. The crown does not care for the likes. But the anger had the wheel now, and she let it drive. Ansel set down his cup. Show me, he said. She blinked. What? Show me, he said again, and he was already reaching for his coat. You say the sick go untended 2 floors down while I dine. I have never once stood in a low house in my life, and that is precisely the trouble you are naming. Is it not? So, show me. Tonight. And we will find out together whether it is as simple as you believe. She had meant to march him through it like an inspection, cold and correct, and make him ashamed. But the moment she led him down into the long stone room where the order kept its stores, something in her that the fine corridors had held clenched tight came loose all at once. Here, she said, and set her lamp on the shelf. Fever draught, requisitioned by the barrel, delivered by the cup. Wound salve, the same. Milk of the poppy for the ones past saving, ordered every month, arrived twice in 2 years. She moved down the empty shelves, and her voice found its old rhythm. Someone signs for the full amount upstream. The coin leaves the treasury, and somewhere between the signing and this room, most of it grows legs and walks. Ansel did not give her a single royal platitude. He said, "Show me the ledger." She stared at him. The ledger. The book where you write down what you asked for and what came. He held out his hand. You said, "Show me. I am asking to be shown." There was something almost boyish in it, an eagerness under the crown, as though she had handed him a knot he genuinely wanted to work loose. She pulled the battered order book from the shelf and gave it over, and watched him turn the pages with a real frown, his thumb stopping on a line, moving on, stopping again. When he looked up, his face had changed. "Who signs off on these upstream?" he asked, "when your master is not by?" "Whoever holds the seal and feels important that day," she said, drier than she meant to. He laughed, one short, surprised note, and she felt the answering pull at the corner of her own mouth before she could stop it. And that frightened her more than the empty shelves did. "You will fill these stores yourself from now on," he said, and drew a ring from his own hand, heavy and warm, and pressed it into her palm. "My seal. Requisition what your low houses need, directly, and let any man who questions it take the matter up with me." He closed her fingers over it. "No more of it, dying on the stair." She looked at the ring in her hand, and at him, and could not for the life of her find the trap in it. They crossed the low yard in the dark on the way back up, and it was Sorrel who heard it first, an old sense waking under her skin, a wrongness in the shadow by the well that no cat ever made. She had a healer's hands and no blade. But she had 2 winters of listening to the dark, and she caught his sleeve. "Wait!" she breathed. They came out of the black all at once, 3 of them, faces, wrapped, moving with a horrible, unhurried discipline that told her they were no common cut-purses. Ansel put her behind him and met the first, faster than a king had any right to be, and the yard filled with the ugly music of it. But, in the scramble a blade licked across his forearm a shallow line. Nothing. The sort of cut she stitched a dozen of, after every drill, except that the moment it opened, she smelled it, green and bitter, worn into the steel. The same ghost that had hung in his warm little room. The last 2 broke off at a low whistle and were simply gone, swallowed back into the dark, and Ansel stood breathing hard, with a scratch on his arm and a careless remark already forming on his mouth. And Sorrel crossed the space between them and seized his wrist hard enough to bruise. "Do not move," she said, and her voice did not sound like her own. "This is not a scratch. There is wolfsbane on that blade. Someone did not come here to rob you, your grace. They came to finish a thing they have started before, more than once, and you knew it, and you let me walk out into this yard beside you all the same." For the better part of a month after that, Sorrel gave herself one honest task, and one she would not say aloud, and it was hard to tell, some days, which of the 2 was making her lie awake. The honest task was the poison. She had drawn the wolfsbane from his arm before it could do more than sicken him for a night, and she had kept a scraping of it, green and waxy, sealed in a twist of cloth, and she studied it the way she had once studied, to save her own place in the world. Because it was wrong. Wolfsbane was a common enough killer, a thing any fool could gather on a hillside and rub on a knife, but this was not the raw leaf. This had been worked, distilled, cut with something that made it cling to steel and slip through skin fast and clean, and that was not hillside knowledge. That was the craft of a trained hand, a patient one, a hand that had spent years among locked shelves, learning exactly how to turn a plant into a quiet death. There were not 10 such hands in the whole realm. She knew, because the Order had trained most of them. The task, she did not say aloud, was that she was falling, and she despised herself a little for it, every day. It crept up on her like a low fever, the kind you mistake for tiredness, until you are already burning. She would go to him with a sharp question about the men in the yard and come away 3 topics later, having been told nothing at all, and somehow not minding. She would corner him on the poison, and he would deflect it with a joke, or worse, tell her she was formidable when she was suspicious, and she would feel the treacherous warmth of it go straight down her spine. He gave her nothing she could use, and a great deal she had no idea what to do with. And there was this, which made the falling worse. The ring he had pressed into her hand had not been an empty gesture. She had gone down to the low houses that first week braced to fight for every barrel, and found instead that the king's seal opened doors that had been shut to the order for years. The fever draughts came, the wound salve came. A child, she had privately given up on in the autumn, sat up in her cot by midwinter and asked for bread. Sorrel had spent 2 winters believing the crown was a cold and distant thing that let the low die and never once looked down. And here was the crown in the shape of a tired man who asked to be shown ledgers, undoing that belief, 1 barrel at a time. It turned out to be a great deal harder to hate a king who kept his word than she had ever expected. He fell into the habit of finding her in the drying loft late, when the hold had gone quiet, and she hung the season's herbs in the dark to keep. He never announced a reason. He would sit on the low bench, among the bunched lavender and the drying yarrow, and simply watch her work, and the first night he did it, she waited a full hour for the ask, the favor, the true purpose, and it never came. "You are staring," she said at last, not turning round. "I am," he agreed, unrepentant. "You move differently here than anywhere else in this hold. Everywhere else you hold yourself like a woman braced for the next unkindness. Here you forget to. It is worth watching." She was glad the loft was dark so he could not see her face. "Do you know," he said another night, "that you are almost certainly the finest healer in the marches, and every great house in this hold would sooner die of a flux than admit a cast-off order woman said so." He said it lightly, but he meant it. She could hear that he meant it. And no one in 2 winters had said such a thing to her, and no one before that either. She had been wanted for her hands, her drafts, her use. She had never once stood in the plain, warm light of a man, simply looking at her as though the whole of her were worth the looking. It undid something in her that the poison and the knives had not managed to touch. She turned then, despite herself, and found him already watching her, and for a moment neither of them looked away, and neither of them pretended to be doing anything else. "Something is wrong with you tonight," he said softly. "You have hung that same bundle of yarrow 3 times. She had. She could not tell him. It was because his voice in the dark had made her hands forget their trade. That was the payoff, and the trap of it both. The more she watched him for danger, the more she found she was only watching him. And in the watching, somewhere in those long, blurred days, she stopped wanting him to be a liar at all. She might have gone on like that a long while, half warmed and half afraid, if the poison had not finally spoken. She took her sealed scraping at last to the one place that could name it, the order's own high stores, the locked room where the deadliest of the craft was kept and counted. She meant only to match it against the catalogue, to see what it had been cut with, and so guess at the hand behind it. She found the match in the 3rd drawer. The very same cutting agent, a rare resin, the order, bought by the thumbnail and guarded like gold, logged out in a careful column in a careful hand. And when she followed the column up the page to see who had signed for the missing measures, her lamp shook in her grip, because the hand that had signed for the poison that kept trying to kill the king was a hand she had loved and trusted since she was 13 years old and shivering in a grove. Oswin, master of the order, the man who had lifted her out of the snow and called her child and pressed her cold hands between his warm, dry ones, not 3 weeks past, and told her to be careful how she gave the king anything at all. His name, in his own patient column set down against the rare resin that turned a hillside weed into a king's quiet death. She told herself she had misread it. She told herself 100 things, standing there alone in the cold locked room, with the lamp guttering, and not one of them stopped the floor from going quietly out from under her. There is a particular cowardice, one might note, in a woman who will run toward a poisoned blade without a heartbeat's pause, and yet cannot make herself walk through a door and ask a plain question of a man she has begun to want. Sorrel had been brave her whole life, about everything that could only kill her. It was the things that could break her she had never learned to face. She did not go back to the high stores. She could not make herself look at the name again, and she could not make herself say it, not to the king, not to anyone, because to say it aloud was to begin pulling a thread that might unravel the one warm thing left in her whole cold life. So she carried it instead, that dreadful column in that dear familiar hand, and it sat in her chest like a stone, and it drove her at last to his door late on a night she should have been sleeping. He opened it himself, in his shirt sleeves, and whatever he saw in her face wiped the easy greeting off his own. "I cannot keep doing this," she said, and her voice came out raw and low. "Every day you will not tell me what is trying to kill you, and you will not tell me what you want from me, and you will not leave me be. And I am not built for this. I am not built to want a thing I am forbidden to have. And you are making me want. And I cannot tell any longer which part of it is real and which part is only a king being kind to a woman he pities. And it is going to be the end of me. So tell me it is a scheme. Tell me you need a healer you can trust and nothing more. Tell me anything at all that makes sense, because I have already lost the bond once, and I did not think I had another loss in me, and it turns out that I do." She had not meant to say half so much. She never did, with him. The truest things in her had a way of climbing out whenever he was near, as though he had found the one loose stone in a wall she had spent 2 winters building, and could not stop worrying it free. Ansel crossed the room to her slow, the way a person crosses toward something that might bolt, and he did not touch her. "It is not pity," he said. "It has not been pity since the ledger, if it ever was at all." He was near enough now that she had to tip her chin to hold his eyes. "I have spent my whole life being what a hall needs me to be, so that no one looks too closely at what I am not. And you looked at me in a storeroom full of empty shelves, and saw straight through all of it in a single evening, and I have not had a peaceful night since. You keep waiting for me to name the use I have for you," he said. "A sword I can trust, a healer I can keep close. Some clever reason, a king stoops to a woman, the great houses threw away. There is no reason, Sorrel. That is the thing I have been making a ruin of trying to tell you. There is no scheme at the bottom of this. There is only that I would rather sit in a dark loft and watch you hang yarrow than sit at any high table in all the marches." He lifted his hand slow and let it hover at the line of her jaw without landing. "Tell me to go," he said, very quiet, "and I will go. And I will never trouble you with any of this again. Or do not." The dead place in her chest, the sealed and scarred place that no cast-off wolf was ever supposed to feel again, chose that exact moment to come fully and shamelessly awake, and it ached toward him like a plant toward the one window in a dark room. Every trained and careful part of her, the part that had learned in a grove exactly what wanting cost a woman, told her to send him away while she still could. But under it, in the dead place that was no longer dead, something older than caution had already made its choice. "Do not," she said. She was not entirely certain which of them closed the last of the distance. It did not matter. His mouth found hers, and every careful, frightened, guarded thing in her went silent and white all at once, and there was no hall to perform for, and no house to answer to, and no name to be ashamed of. There was only the warm certain fact of him, and the astonishing plain truth, rolling off him, and through her, that he wanted her. Her, not her hands, not her drafts, not her use. Her. She had spent her whole life being needed. She had never once until this moment been chosen, and it folded her resistance clean in half. She fisted her hand in his shirt and pulled him down and kissed him, the way she had spent a month refusing to let herself imagine, and felt the low, rough sound it drew out of him. And for once, she did not calculate. She did not weigh the cost, or count the ways it might be turned against her later. She let herself have it. She let herself have him. What came after, the loft went unlit for, and the drying herbs kept their own counsel, and for a handful of stolen hours, the king of all the marches, and the healer, the realm had thrown away, belonged to no one in the whole world but each other. She woke before the dawn bell with his arm heavy and warm across her, and his breath slow against the back of her neck. And for one soft, unguarded moment, she let herself lie still inside it and be, simply, happy. It was the first time in 2 winters she could remember the feeling by its right name. The scarred place in her chest lay open and warm against him, not aching now but simply present, a quiet thread running from her ribs to his that she did not yet understand, and was far too content for one moment to question. Then she opened her eyes onto the cold gray light, and the stone came back into her chest. The dreadful column, the dear and terrible hand that had signed for his death, and she lay very still in the arms of a man she had begun to love and understood that she was already, quietly, lying to him. And she knew, with the same cold certainty that had never once failed her at a sickbed, that a lie told to keep someone safe was a lie all the same, and that it would have its price, and that the only question left to her was when it would come to collect. It is a strange cruelty of the world that the sweetest morning of a person's life and the first morning of its unraveling are, now and again, the very same morning. By the time the sun was full up, Hollowmere had become a different place. Lord Hollis of the River Marches had come at last to seal the long peace, and the whole hold bent itself to pleasing him. There were to be 3 days of feasting, and at the end of them an alliance that would hold the Marches quiet for a generation. Ansel needed it badly. A young king, still half doubted by his own great houses, needed a powerful old lord to stand at his shoulder and name him friend. And so Ansel put on the charming king the way another man pulls on his boots, and went down to be admired. Sorrel watched him from the healer's place at the low end of the hall, and now that she had learned the shape of him in the dark, she could see to the copper penny exactly what it cost. He laughed at the right moments, and touched the right elbows, and let Lord Hollis win at cards by exactly the right margin, and not one lord in that hall saw the strain of it. She saw the way his smile never reached the river ice of his eyes, the way his hand tightened on his cup between courtesies, the small held breath before he turned to charm another suspicious old house into loving him. He was carrying the whole piece on his back and pretending it weighed nothing, and no one in the realm had ever been meant to notice. She found him late that first night on a cold colonnade above the gardens, where he had slipped away from the noise, for the space of one held breath. The performing king was gone. What stood in his place, elbows on the stone rail, looking out at nothing, was only a tired man. "You hate this," she said. He did not turn. "Hate is a strong word." "You hate this," she said again, and came to stand beside him, and he let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "I do," he admitted, and something in his shoulders came down. "I have been doing it since I was 19. Smiling, charming, being the thing the hall needs. So no one looks too hard at the frightened boy who inherited a throne he was not ready for. Some days I cannot tell whether that makes me clever or only a practiced liar." She reached up, before she had decided to, and turned his face toward her with 2 fingers. The false ease fell off it like a dropped mask. "The man they cheer for down there is not the one worth having," she said quietly. "The one worth having is the one who asked to see a ledger. I have met a great many powerful men, Your Grace, and thought little of any of them. I think a very great deal of you. And that is the plain truth, and it frightens me more than the poison does." Something cracked open behind his eyes. He kissed her, and it was not like the loft. It was fierce and grateful, and close to desperate, and she leaned up into it, and the world tilted underneath her, because in that moment the scarred and sealed place in her chest did not merely ache, it opened. It opened like a door blown wide in a storm, and through it came his heart, whole and unguarded and utterly foreign. Relief and fear and a fierce aching tenderness that was not hers, that she could never have invented, pouring straight into her through the place where they touched. She felt him, she felt his very self, distinct and real and impossible, and no cast-off wolf, in all the long history of the blood, had ever felt such a thing again. Sorrel wrenched back with a gasp, her hand flying to her breastbone. His eyes were blown wide. "You felt that," he breathed. "Sorrel, tell me you felt it." He took a step toward her, and she saw the wild hope in him, the desperate need to close the space and touch her and prove the impossible thing was real. "It was nothing," she heard herself say, "a trick of the nerves. Forget it." He went perfectly still. "Nothing," he repeated. "Nothing," she said again, and hated herself even as she said it, because the alternative was to believe that a dead thing had come back to life for a man who might yet break her, and she was not brave enough for that. Not yet. She watched the wonder go out of him. She watched him fold the impossible thing away and make himself small around it, the very way she had folded away her own dead bond 2 winters past, and she knew to the bone what she had just cost him, because she had paid the same coin once and never got it back. The light in his face banked down to something careful and hurt, and he opened his mouth to answer, and that was when Sorrel's whole body went cold for an entirely different reason. Somewhere below, in the bright warm heart of the feast, she caught it on the turning air, green, bitter, wrong. She was moving before she had finished the thought, back through the doors and down into the hall, her healer's eye cutting through the crowd to the high table, where a steward was even then setting a fresh cup at Lord Hollis's right hand, at the place that had been laid for the king. Ansel was 3 steps behind her. She reached the table and struck the cup from the board with the flat of her hand, and it shattered on the flagstones, and the whole feast turned to stare at the king's mad healer, standing over a spreading dark stain. "Wolfsbane," she said low, for Ansel alone kneeling at the broken glass with her nose an inch from the wine. "The same hand, the same craft, meant for your cup, your grace, at your own table of peace." Down the hall 100 faces had turned, curiosity sharpening into something hungrier. The king's strange healer, the one the whispers said had bewitched him, smashing cups at the high table like a woman gone mad. She could see the story writing itself across their faces even as she knelt. "Say nothing," Ansel breathed, gripping her elbow, drawing her up, his court smile already snapping back into place for the watching hall. "Not here. Not with Hollis 50 feet away and a treaty unsigned between us. If it is known that a king cannot keep poison off his own table, the peace dies tonight and the marches burn by spring. Please trust me 1 more hour." She let him lead her out, smiling for the room, her heart slamming. But she had spent 2 winters learning to say one thing with her face and think another behind it, and while he smiled and soothed and steered her toward the doors, she watched him. And an hour later, when he thought her safely abed, she watched him slip from his rooms, in a dark cloak, and go quiet and quick down through the sleeping hold, and she followed. He did not go to his own study. He went to the master's, to Oswin's. To the one locked door in all of Hollowmere, she had been most afraid to open herself. And when she eased it back, there he was, behind Oswin's great desk in the dark, the drawers standing open, a sheaf of the master's private papers in his hand. Ansel was a man who always had the answer before you had finished the question. She had learned that about him in a month of watching him turn every hard thing aside with a smile. But now he stood caught behind Oswin's desk, with the stolen papers in his fist, and for once in his life, he had no answer ready, and the silence stretched between them like a held breath. "Say something," she thought at him, wordless. "Tell me this is not what it plainly is. Someone put wolfsbane in your cup." "Not 2 hours past," she said aloud instead, her voice gone thin. "You told me to say nothing. And then the moment you thought me asleep, you came straight down here in the dark to rifle the private papers of the master of my order. So I will ask you once, your grace, and I would give a great deal for you to have a good answer. What are you doing?" He set the papers down slowly. "I have been investigating Oswin," he said. The words would not resolve into sense. They were only sounds. "For the better part of a year," he went on, and his voice had gone quiet and terribly gentle, the smooth, careful voice he used on frightened lords, the one he had not used on her in weeks, the stores that never arrive. The coin that leaves the treasury for the low houses and simply vanishes. It is not neglect, Sorrel, it never was. It is theft, patient and deliberate, and it runs back to one man. He has been bleeding the crown's care for the sick into the coffers of House Talon for years, and House Talon has spent that coin buying the loyalty of hungry men, and the hungry men have been putting wolfsbane on their blades and trying to make me dead, so a cleaner king might sit where I sit. He looked at her. I think you already know the hand. I think you found it before I did. You have not been able to look me in the eye for a fortnight. The locked room. The third drawer. The careful column in the dear familiar hand. She pressed her fist to her mouth. Then you know, she whispered. And you said nothing to me either. No, he agreed low, because I could not be certain of you. That struck her like a slap, and she took it, because it was fair. I needed someone inside the order, he said. Someone Oswin trusted absolutely. Someone who could move through the master's world without turning a single head. And then, at a gathering, meant to grind a woman into nothing. That very someone walked into my hall on the arm of no one at all, cast off and unclaimed, and beholden to Oswin for the whole of her broken life. He did not look away from her while he said it. I told myself I claimed you to spite Varric. That was half of it. The other half was that I needed you, Sorrel, close to me and closer to him. And I let it begin as that. I will not stand here and lie to you now and say the crossing of that hall was pure. There it was. The floor she had felt swaying for a fortnight finally gave way beneath her. You used me, she said. It began as using you, he said. I have watched you walk toward blades meant for me. Watched you fill a dying child's cup and a beggar's bowl with the same steady hands. Somewhere in that, I stopped counting you as a piece on a board and lost the ability to picture the board without you at all. But you asked me once to give you the truth even when it damned me, and so I will. It began as using you. It stopped being that so long ago I can scarcely find the seam. I will not insult you by pretending it did not start exactly there. She turned away from him because she could not bear his face, and her eye fell on the papers he had let go, and on the top sheet, in Oswin's patient hand, she saw a thing that stopped her heart a second time, her own name. And beside it, a date 2 winters gone, and the name of House Var, and a sum of coin. She picked it up. She could not help it. She read it twice. Yes, Ansel said, very gently, from behind her. That is the thing I came down here tonight to be certain of. He did not only steal from the sick Sorrel. 2 winters ago he paid Varrec's house to cast you off. He wrote the words your first mate spoke in that grove. He broke your bond on purpose, so that a gifted, grieving, friendless healer would fall gratefully into the one pair of open arms in the whole realm, and belong to him and never once think to question the man who had saved her. Every kindness he ever showed you was a hand kept on a tool he was keeping sharp. She stood in the master's dark study with the proof of her whole ruined life in her shaking hands, and understood at last why Varric had spoken his rejection like a lesson learned by heart, because it had been. Oswin had taught it to him, word for word. 2 winters she had spent, believing her own worthlessness was a thing she had earned, a verdict handed down by fate, because some flaw buried in her had made even a bonded mate walk away. And it had been a purchase, a line of coin in a column. She had grieved a lie and rebuilt her whole self around a wound a kind old man had opened in her on purpose, so the rebuilding would happen in his careful hands. Every love she had, the man who raised her had built her out of a deliberate cruelty to be his creature. And the man she had fallen for had claimed her as a piece on a board. She had been used and used and used, and she had thanked them both for it. You should have told me, she said, and her voice broke on it. You watched me put my own body between you and a blade. You let me into that loft. And in the whole of it, you never once told me the truth. I know, he said. I was a coward. I thought you would not believe me. I thought you would run straight back to him. And God's help me, Sorrel. I was afraid of losing the one true thing I had found in the middle of all my scheming. It was a good answer. It was even, she suspected, an honest one. And she could not bear the sound of another honest thing tonight. "Do not follow me," she said, and put the paper down, and walked out into the corridor. And there, 10 paces down the dark hall, silver at the temples and warm-eyed and waiting for her, as though he had known she would come, stood Oswin. "Child," Oswin said gently, "you are white as a corpse. What has he done to you?" And Sorrel, who had just watched her whole life come apart in a locked room, felt the oldest instinct she owned rise up and take her hand. She went to him. Her feet carried her the 10 paces before her mind had voted on it, because he had pulled her out of the snow when she was 13, and there was a groove worn in her, deeper than thought, that said this man is safe. She let him fold her cold hands into his warm, dry ones, and she made her face crumple, and she wept, and every tear was real, even as she used it. "He used me, master," she got out. "It was never real. He only wanted me close to." He could not say the rest. "I know," Oswin murmured, and stroked her hair. And something in the smoothness of it, the readiness turned her stomach, even as she leaned into him. "I know, child. I had hoped to spare you this." He held her at arm's length and looked at her with such tender sorrow that had she not held the proof of his hand in her own that very hour, she would have believed it whole. "It is worse than you know," he said. "I have just come from Lord Hollis. His young nephew, the boy Perrin, has been taken gravely ill. Poisoned, Sorrel. And the trail of it leads to the king." She went, still in his hands, and made the stillness look like shock. And behind it, her healer's mind went cold and quick, and began, without her permission, to work. "Ansel poisoned a guest of this house," Oswin said, low and grave. "To throw the blame on House Talon and shatter the peace so he might rule by the sword instead of the treaty. He is too weak to hold. I saw the boy myself, not 1 hour ago." He turned her toward the far stairs, an arm about her shoulders, kind and certain. "A king who would strike at a guest under his own roof is no king. He will fall for this, and he should, and there are good and steady houses ready to hold the marches after. But it cannot come from me. I am only an old healer. They will say I reach above my station." He stopped and looked at her, and his voice went soft as falling snow. "It must come from you. The king's own intended, a healer whose word on a poison no lord alive would dare to doubt. Tell Lord Hollis you know the king's hand in this, and no soul in that room will question it, and the realm will be saved from a tyrant." And there it was. The whole of the trap laid out plain and lovingly for her, with her grief for the bait, and her good name for the blade. But he had made one small mistake, because he had never once in 13 years thought of her as anything but a tool, and a man does not watch his own hammer to see whether it is listening. "Perrin, taken ill within the hour," he had said. But Sorrel had drawn that same distilled wolfsbane out of a wound with her own hands, and she knew to the hour how it moved, slow and patient, a thing that took its long hours to climb. If the boy was already gravely ill, he had been given the poison long before tonight, long before any of the evening's ruin, at a time when it could only have been set in motion by a hand that had planned all of this days in advance. Not the king's hand, raised in the heat of a single hour. The master's hand, patient as a column of figures. Oswin had poisoned the child himself, days ago, to have this exact knife ready for this exact night. He had struck at a sleeping guest, days in advance, and kept the antidote locked in a drawer, and carried the whole patient cruelty of it behind his kind, tired eyes, while he pressed her hands and called her his good girl. She had believed. An hour passed. She had reached the very bottom of what the people she loved could do. She had been wrong again. There was always a lower floor. Sorrel lifted her wet face from her benefactor's shoulder and let him see a woman broken and grateful, and his. "Tell me what to say," she whispered. His eyes warmed with the pleasure of a tool that fits the hand. "Good girl," he said. "Lord Hollis is waiting." They walked, and it was the longest walk of her life, and she spent every step of it with her mind racing behind her ruined face, because she had nothing at all but her word, and a healer's certainty, and one wrong sentence in that room would start a war and hang the man she had not finished loving. She had no ledger in her hand, no witness but herself, no proof any lord could hold to the light. She had only what every good healer had, the plain truth of a body and the nerve to name it aloud. In a room full of powerful men who did not wish to hear it, it would have to be enough. She had built a life out of it, being enough. Lord Hollis had taken a great council chamber in the east wing. The doors stood open. Fire and lamplight and grave hard faces. The old river Lord Grey with fury and fear for his boy, his guards along the walls, and Ansel, brought under escort, standing straight-backed and alone in the center of it all, with the look of a man who has already counted the exits and found them closed. He saw her come in on Oswin's arm, and for half a heartbeat his whole face opened toward her in helpless hope, and then he understood who she walked beside, and the hope went out of him like a snuffed candle. Every face in the chamber turned to the king's healer in the doorway. Master Oswin bowed to the river lord with the grave sorrow of an old man bearing terrible news. "It grieves me past speaking, my lord," he said, "to bring this beneath your host's own roof. But your nephew has been poisoned, and the hand that did it sits crowned in this hall." He half turned and swept that kind and dreadful hand toward Sorrel. "My lord, I would not ask you to take the word of an old healer with a grievance. Take it instead from the king's own promised bride, who loves him, and who therefore has every reason in the world to keep his secret, and does not. Sorrel, tell Lord Hollis what you know." The whole room swung to her. The river lord, desperate, leaning forward. Oswin, certain of his tool. And Ansel, who believed she had come to bury him, watching her, with a terrible, quiet acceptance, as though he thought he had earned this, and would not even blame her for it. She looked at him. "I am sorry," she told him with no words at all. "I should have believed you sooner." Then she turned to Lord Hollis and lifted her chin. "I know a great deal about this poison, my lord," she said, and her healer's voice carried clear and steady to every corner of the room. "I know it because I have drawn it out of a wound with my own hands. It is distilled wolfsbane, cut with a resin the Grey Order buys by the thumbnail and keeps under 3 locks, and I will tell you what I know of it plainly. It did not come from the king." A ripple went round the chamber. Oswin went rigid at her side. "Your nephew is gravely ill already," she went on. "I can see it in your face, my lord. The hour is late for him. But this poison is a slow and patient killer. It climbs across days, not within an hour. For the boy to be as ill as he is tonight, he was given it long before this evening, long before any quarrel the master would have you imagine between the king and House Talon. Which means it was set in motion days ago by a hand that planned this night in advance, with the boy's suffering marked on a calendar like a delivery of grain. I have spent the whole of my life among the sick, my lord. I know to the hour what a poison does, and when it was given, the way you know the borders of your own lands. I would stake my order and my name upon it." She turned at last, and looked full at the man who had raised her. "The king had no such days," she said, "but the master of my order had all of them. The resin is his to sign for. I have seen the ledger with his name upon it in his own hand. And there is a page in his locked desk this very night that records a sum of coin paid 2 winters past to House Var, and another accounting the crown's stolen care, flowing season upon season into House Talon. Search his quarters, my lord. Now, while he stands here and cannot reach them, see whether you find the medicines to save a poisoned child, or only the poison itself and the coin that bought a war." For one breath, the chamber hung in perfect silence. Then Oswin moved. The kindly old healer was simply gone, and in his place stood something cornered and fast, and a thin blade slid out of his sleeve into his hand, and he came not at the guards and not at the king, but straight at her, because she was the tool that had turned in his grip, and a craftsman cannot abide that. But Sorrel had spent 13 years being taught by this very man exactly how a body was made, and where it was strong, and where, if you knew precisely, it could be undone. She did not try to match his blade. She stepped inside its arc the way he had once taught her to step inside, a seizing patient's flailing arm, caught his wrist, and drove the stiff points of her fingers into the soft cluster of nerve beneath his jaw, with a healer's perfect and pitiless knowledge. His hand opened, the knife rang on the stone. He folded to his knees, with a strangled sound, and she stood over the man who had built her, breathing hard. "You taught me every place a body fails," she said to him, low. "You should not have come at me with a blade." He looked up at her from his knees, and for the first time in 13 years there was nothing kind in his face at all, only the cold arithmetic that had always been underneath. Perhaps a child needs so badly to be saved that she will love the hand that lifts her and never once ask what it means to keep. Then, Hollis's guards had him, and hauled him up, and it was done. They found the boy's antidote in the master's own stores where she had said it would be, because a careful poisoner always keeps the cure, and beside it the ledgers she had named, so that by sunrise there was not a lord in Hollowmere who could pretend the master of the Grey Order was anything but what she had called him. And Sorrel spent the grim hours before dawn at the child's bedside pulling him back from the dark, and by the grey light little Perrin was breathing easy and the peace was saved, and the true traitors sat in irons beneath the old fort. And Ansel, cleared, restored, alive, came to her in the cold corridor outside the sick room with his whole heart in his face. "You saved me," he said. "After everything I did, you saved me anyway." "I saved a king from a lie." "Because it was a lie," she said, and made her voice flat, "because it was the only way to keep it from shaking. And I saved a child because he was a child. Do not mistake either one for forgiveness." The light in him flickered and dimmed. "The bond," he said low, "it woke. On the colonnade. You felt it, Sorrel. I know you did. It is real." "It does not matter whether it is real," she said, though the starved and open place in her chest was straining toward him even as she spoke. "You looked me in the eye for a month and used me. A bond does not undo that. It only means the wound will have a voice in it forever." She saw the exact moment he understood that he had broken a thing that might never come whole again. "Sorrel," he said. "Please, I will do anything." "Be a good king," she said. "You will make a very good one. That is what I want from you. Nothing else." He did not argue. That was almost the worst of it. The old Ansel would have had a clever answer ready before she finished the sentence. This one only stood in the grey light and let the words land and be true, and bowed his head and let her go, because he had learned there were some things a king could not charm his way out of, and this was the largest. And she walked out into the dawn with her whole chest aching after him, and did not let herself look back. There is an old and foolish belief that the hardest part of any wound is the getting of it, and that once a person has survived the blade, the rest is only healing. Any healer could tell you it is a lie. Sorrel had walked out of that corridor whole and vindicated and free, and she spent the next half a year discovering exactly how long a free and vindicated woman could go on quietly bleeding. The realm, at least, was mended. Oswin sat in irons, and the rot he had worked into the order for a decade was cut out clean. Ansel remade the whole of it, and did the thing no one expected, and set Sorrel at the head of it, master of the Grey Order and physician to the crown, the discarded healer raised over the very houses that had pitied her. She had always known she would be good at it. The low houses had their medicines, now the sick were tended, and the city that had doubted its boy king had begun, cautiously, to love him. And for 5 of those 6 months, that boy king courted her with a patience that would have shamed a saint. He did not send flowers. He knew her better than that. He sent the order's stores filled to the beams, and a standing order under his own seal, that no healer of the Grey was ever again to answer to any house but hers. When she came into a council, he rose before the lords every time, until they learned to rise with him, and he wrote to her. Letter after letter in his own hand, some short, some running for pages, some not about her at all. A posting, a pension, a question about a fever in the eastern camps, as though her plain opinion were still a thing worth having. One read only, I keep writing the same small word 100 ways, and have not yet found one large enough. So I will simply keep sending the small one. Linnet and Bram had opinions, of course. Good, said Linnet in the early weeks, fierce and loyal. Let him bleed for a while. You owe that man nothing. But the weeks turned, and one evening Bram said quietly, he filled the eastern stores again this morning, and he has written you how many times now? And Linnet, who had been keeping a tally, said, 40, without looking up. I was used, Sorrel told them, and set down her pen. I am not queuing up for another turn at it. I am a good master, and the order runs well, and I would like to be left in peace to do my work. The trouble was the bond. She kept it shut with the whole strength of her will, starved and shuddered, certain that a thing so long dead would die again if she refused to feed it. It would not. Every night the warm patient thread under her ribs stayed exactly where it was, refusing to wither, refusing to let her go. Then, in the 6th month, a letter came that was different. Sorrel, it read, you deserved better than the way I came to you, and you have made your choice. And I will honor it. I will not write again. Be well, be happy. It was enough to have loved you at all. She read it 3 times. It was everything she had told him she wanted, and it sat in her chest like a stone going down a well. Because it turned out that a door closing gently is still a door closing, and she had not once, in all her careful refusing, actually wanted him to stop. She was still holding it when the knock came, and Bram put his gray face round the door, and behind him Linnet, both of them, the particular color of people who have made a very great mistake. He is gone, Bram said, the king. Not in his chambers, not anywhere. He rode out past the east gate alone, before the moon rose, and left no guard and no word. Cold went straight down her spine. Gone where? There is talk, Linnet said low, that the last of House Talon never scattered, that one of them remains, and that a message came to the king at dusk, and he went to end it himself, rather than spend another soldier's life. She swallowed. Sorrel, he went alone. And Sorrel was on her feet without deciding to be, because she had known this man's foolish, self-spending heart for half a year, and she knew exactly the sort of thing he would ride out into the dark to do alone, so that no one else would have to. She pressed her hand flat to her breastbone. Over the bond she had spent 6 months trying to smother. It is only duty, she told herself. He is my king. Finding him is my work. It was not only that. She had known it was not only that from the moment Bram said gone. She opened the bond. It hit her like the storm-blown door it had always been. His self came pouring through, near and unguarded, and it was not the clean fear of a fight. It was grief, deep and bottomless, the twin of the one she had carried for half a year, and under it, quiet and terrible, the resolve of a man who has decided the surest way to set someone free is to make certain he does not come back. He had not ridden out only to end the last of Talon. He had ridden out, meaning to end it in the one place the whole story had begun. She followed the pull of him like a rope, hauling her forward, out through the east gate at a dead run under a thin freezing moon, and it led her where some deep part of her had known it would. The birch grove. The place Varric had spoken his borrowed words, and cut her loose, 2 winters past. The place Oswin had chosen for her, breaking on purpose. She came through the white trees with her heart in her throat, and found him. He was alive. He knelt in the frost, with a dead man sprawled beyond him, and a long shallow cut across his ribs, the last of House Talon finished at last, alone in the exact clearing where her life had once ended. One hand pressed to his side, having come here to bleed in the dark rather than let anyone watch him do it. He looked up, and saw her, and his whole ruined face broke open. "You should not have come," he said. "That is rather the point of me," he added, with a ghost of the old dreadful humor. "I go where I am not wanted, so that no one else has to." She crossed the frozen grove and dropped to her knees in front of him, and put her healer's hands to his side without a word, and felt the wound, and found it shallow, not deep, not dying, and only then did she let herself breathe. "I came here to set you free," he said, low, while she worked. "Tomorrow, before all the houses, I meant to renounce the claim publicly. Take my name off you entirely, so the scandal never touches you again, so you are bound to no man who ever used you." He winced under her hands. "And to end the last of them here first, quietly, so that going free did not also mean going in danger." He gave a small broken laugh. "I am aware how it looks from the outside. You are the most exhausting man in the whole of the marches," she said, and her voice was not steady at all. "Yes," he agreed. "I do not want to be set free," she said. He went very still under her hands. "Ask me again," she said, before her courage could fail, her palm flat over his stuttering heart, and the bond wide open between them, at last, unstarved, unashamed, blazing. "Not tonight. Not while you are bleeding on my hands and half convinced you deserve to. Ask me again when you are whole, and when I can be certain it is me you want, and not the guilt, and I will give you my answer." His hand came up and covered hers, where it lay over his heart. "And you will say," he breathed. "Ask me," she said, "and find out." In the end, it took him a full turn of the moon to heal, and one more day to find his courage. And he asked her at the sealing of the peace, the least private moment he could have chosen. She had long since stopped being surprised by him. The great hall of Hollowmere was full to the walls that day, every proud house of the Marches, crowded under the one roof, to swear the long peace at last. It was the very same hall, near enough, that had once set a lonely stool apart from the benches, so a rejected healer would have room to be ashamed. Sorrel stood at the high end of it now, master of the Grey Order, physician to the crown, and watched the king of all the Marches rise from his seat and cross the crowded floor toward her exactly as he had crossed it 2 winters and a whole lifetime ago. But this time she did not wait to be reached. She walked out to meet him, down the length of that enormous hall, past the houses that had scorned her, and the lords who had pitied her, and Varick of House Var, gone grey and small in his corner, and the murmur died the way a stream dies going over stone. And the whole bright weight of the realm fell silent to watch the woman they had thrown away close the last of the distance herself. And in the ringing hush of it before all of them, Sorrel took the Alpha King's hand in both of hers. "You took mine once," she said, "quiet enough for him alone, in a room full of people who wanted me gone. It seemed only fair that I take yours in front of the same." She tightened her fingers. "No one is ever going to make me arrive anywhere alone again. Least of all you," he was crying, unabashed, before the entire realm. She had rather known he would. She did not quite manage it herself, but it was a near thing, and the open bond gave her away regardless, and he laughed at her through his tears, and she stopped caring who saw. "You are stuck with me now," he murmured, when the vows were done and the hall was roaring. "No taking it back." "Why would I take it back?" she said. "I am the one who crossed the room, if you recall." "Best thing that ever happened to me," he said. She kissed him, and for once in her life, she did not argue,